The burden of migraine is huge because it strikes mostly women than men in the most productive years of their life, when they have plans to create a family, work, education. And when it strikes, it causes disability. And that's why among women in the age group between 18 and 50 years old, it's a number one cause of disability worldwide.
För mig så känns det som att man tar en burk med syra och häller det in genom ögat. Det liksom letar sig bak genom tinningen och ner mot nacken. Som att det fräter i hjärnan. Huvudvärk har alltid funnits i vår familj. Min mamma har lidit väldigt mycket av huvudvärk, men klarat sig på lite starkare Treo komp och sådär. Aldrig något tal om migrän, men upprepade huvudvärksanfall under hela min uppväxt. Och då blev det väldigt naturligt för mig när jag fick mina anfall att ja, men nu är jag inne på samma bana, nu är det någonting som jag också måste leva med. Och då, ja, det blev ju inte att jag sökte hjälp direkt då, för att det hade aldrig min mamma gjort, utan hon klarade sig och då klarar jag mig också. Ungefär när jag var 17 år gammal så tog jag min första läkarkontakt, och det var helt enkelt på grund av att jag kände att det inte räckte med de här vanliga värktabletterna längre. Anfallen kom allt oftare, blev mer intensiva och jag kunde inte bryta anfallen med hjälp av vanliga tabletter längre.
People who don't have migraine can skip a night of sleep and don't get a headache. They can skip 1 or 2 meals a day, they don't get a headache. They get stressed at work or during exam, they don't get a headache. They go home at the end of the day when stress is over and they relax, they don't get a headache. The migraine brain is different. In migraine patients, if they don't eat, if they skip a meal, they get a migraine. Because the neurons that tell them you didn't eat enough, it's time to eat, see that, and their reaction after being bombarded by a pain signal for many years is they overreact, and the end result is a sequence of events that will eventually end up with a headache, with a migraine. It's not good for you to be in pain. Pain changes the brain. And I think that the biggest challenge that we have now is really to convince the world that if we treat migraine patients aggressively, especially with prophylactic drugs that get the chance to take the headache away for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, we have the chance to eventually bring the brain from a status of a migraine brain to a status of a non-migraine brain.
Migraine is a quite complex disease with a strong genetic component. It is characterized by recurrent attacks of headache associated with some migraine symptoms. In order to understand disease mechanisms underlying migraine, we need to conduct basic research. And one of the challenges of the basic research is that disease is characterized based on the symptoms and history. We don't have specific biomarkers, meaning you take a blood test, you can diagnose migraine, or you do the imaging, you can diagnose migraine. No, it's non-existing. So it's based on the symptoms, on the history. But it also creates a unique opportunity to conduct research in humans and to conduct basic research in humans. Because migraine by its nature is provocable. You can hear from patients during the interviews that attacks can be triggered by the different factors. And this feature of migraine can be used in order to understand basic mechanisms underlying migraine. When we do experiments in humans, we use different triggers to induce migraine attacks. And so far, all the triggers are vasodilators, meaning that they dilate the vessels, in particular vessels in the cranial region. We think that trigeminal vascular system which consists of the trigeminal nerve, which is a pain-sensitive nerve, vessels and brain, is very important in context of migraine pathophysiology. And the activation of this system with these vascular or vasodilating agents, substances, is very important when we study migraine experimental condition. We use different molecules, including a very important one, which we hear so much about, CGRP, calcitonin-generated peptide. This molecule is distributed or present or expressed in trigeminal vascular system. CGRP is released upon activation of this system. And using experimental model, we showed that infusion of CGRP can provoke migraine attacks, indistinguishable from the spontaneous migraine attacks of patients. Based on this data and data from preclinical experiments, the new medication was introduced. And mechanisms of these medications is anti-CGRP. Either they work on the molecule itself or they work against receptor. And the drugs in this family of work as abortive. They can stop attack, or they can reduce the pain intensity during the attacks or associated symptoms, or they can prevent, so they can also be used as a preventive medications. So it's quite unique situation we are now, that we have a mechanism-based new medication to abort migraine attacks and to prevent migraine attacks at the same time.
När jag slutade gymnasiet så började man ju på lite extra jobb och sådär. Och jag kommer ihåg att det flöt på ganska bra, om man nu kan säga så. Jag fick mina anfall, men jag tog mina tabletter. Det fungerade ganska väl. Jag levde med det helt enkelt. Sen började jag på sjuksköterskeprogrammet i Kristianstad och märkte ju ganska direkt att det eskalerade fort. Självklart, nu när jag tänker efter, att det blir ju en naturlig följd med stressen och pressen och studier på en helt annan nivå än vad man hade gjort tidigare. Så det var många lektioner, många tågresor där man var frånvarande. Jag var tvungen att berätta för mina närmsta studiekamrater att nu har jag ont i huvudet, sa jag bara. Och då liksom förstod de att jag var tvungen att vila på tåget eller sådär. Men i skolan så var man ju alltid på topp. Jag kunde inte acceptera att vara en elev som det inte gick lika bra för på grund av min sjukdom. Tvärtom så nämnde jag aldrig för lärarna att jag hade migrän. Det var precis bara de närmsta vännerna som visste om det. Men inte ens de visste när jag fick varje anfall. Jag ville aldrig göra en omtenta. Jag skulle liksom vara bäst på det jag gjorde. Och jag klarade mig igenom. Jag tog tabletter, vad var det då? Mellan 2 till 4 gånger i veckan som jag fick de här anfallen. Jag satt på seminarier med sprängande huvudvärk. Men lyckades på något sätt ha en fasad utåt. Där jag bara tog mig igenom det. När jag tog examen på sjuksköterskeutbildningen, det var liksom en superlycklig dag. Vi hade förberett oss så länge och vi skulle ut och festa på kvällen och verkligen fira. Men vi gick igenom examen på dagen och sådär och det var ju kul. Men sen när det roliga skulle komma på kvällen, då kom migränen som ett brev på posten och det slutade med att jag fick ligga i sängen hela min examenskväll. Alla andra var ute och festade utom jag. Och, det var väldigt tråkigt. Det var ett tråkigt sätt att avsluta utbildningen på.
What is the clinical impact of the research that we're doing here in our lab? The clinical impact is a twofold. One is to understand the basic mechanisms. And when we understand the basic mechanisms in humans, and so far we know that migraine, it's a pure human experience, we can translate this understanding into better treatment. This is what I see for the future. And by exploring the different triggering molecules, different signaling pathways, we can provide multiple mechanism-based anti-migraine medications. We are very lucky in migraine field that we have triptans, migraine-specific abortive medications. We have now anti-CGRP medications, which can be used as abortive and as a preventive. But not all patients are responding to these medications, so there is a huge unmet need.
Triptantabletterna var ju verkligen, det var min livlina, men det var verkligen en hatkärlek. Det kändes som att jag aldrig hade klarat mig utan dem och det vet jag inte hur jag hade gjort heller. Jag kände och visste att de inte var bra för mig och med det antalet som jag tog så visste jag också att det här är inte bra. Samtidigt som att jag var så rädd att de skulle sluta fungera. Att jag först började med en tablett och att det sen eskalerade i mina anfall, att jag var tvungen att ta 2 stycken. Man fick bara ta 2 stycken på ett dygn. Vad händer om jag tar de 2 och att det sen inte funkar längre? Så jag hade ju den konstanta rädslan också för att det inte längre skulle finnas ett alternativ för mig när de slutade fungera. Direkt efter sjuksköterskeexamen så fick jag ett jobb på medicinska akutvårdsavdelning i Lund. Det var ett fantastiskt jobb på många sätt. Det hände så otroligt mycket på en dag. Man kunde ju påbörja sitt pass med att någon stod och gjorde hjärtkompressioner och det var larm på hela avdelningen. Och man hann knappt överrapportera, man fick liksom ta en muntlig rapport och sen man var igång hela tiden. Vilket jag tycker är superduper roligt. Och jag blir lugn i sådana situationer, jag gillar den typen av stress. Men jag kände också att det var inte jättebra för kroppen. Man är ju så fokuserad i vad man gör, men sen samtidigt så känner man där bak, även om adrenalinet trycker undan allting, så mår man så fruktansvärt dåligt. Man mår så illa så man nästan känner att man kommer kräkas rakt ut över allting. Man känner hur det bara spränger och bultar. Men man är så fokuserad på det man måste göra för att det är viktigare än någonting annat. Och jag tackar ju adrenalinet för att det gör att man överlever. För att dagarna som var så på jobbet, man gjorde det man skulle, man lyckades. Men man kände ju den här traumatiska känslan efteråt. Att det var ingen annan som förstod vad som pågick hos mig. Alla andra var uppe i sitt. Och det var jag också, men på ett annat sätt. Och när man satte sig sen i bilen på vägen hem, det var ju då allting sköljde över en. Det var då adrenalinet släppte, det var då smärtan liksom nådde sin kulmen. Jag fick stanna flera gånger när jag skulle köra hem för att jag blev så yr och så påverkad av smärtan att jag inte kunde köra bil. Då fick jag sitta och vänta ut om det skulle ta 1 timme, 2 timmar, 3 timmar. För jag kunde inte fortsätta. Ofta när jag hade slutat jobbet och skulle hämta barnen på förskolan, det var ju oftast då som anfallen var i full gång. Och jag blir väldigt off. Jag kan inte prata så mycket. All den här energin den lilla energin man hade, det hade man ju lagt på att folk skulle överleva på jobbet. Så tyvärr kände jag ju många gånger att familjelivet var det som blev allra mest lidande. Det var här jag kunde slappna av i hemmet, jag behövde inte hålla upp en fasad. Men det blev ju också att jag kanske snäste alldeles för ofta till barnen när jag blev irriterad. Och så fick man ångest över det i efterhand. Min sambo slutar senare än vad jag gör, vilket betyder att när barnen kom hem, då är de hungriga. Vi ska påbörja allt som har med familjelivet att göra, laga middag, städa undan från kvällen innan. Alla som har familj vet vad det innebär. Liksom. Och det gjorde man med fullt påslag av migrän. Så ja, det fick bara göras, men man kände sig inte som en bra mamma.
The burden of migraine is huge because it strikes mostly women than men in the most productive years of their life, when they have plans to create a family, work, education. And when it strikes, it causes disability. And that's why among women in the age group between 18 and 50 years old, it's a #1 cause of disability worldwide.
Women are really affected disproportionately by migraine. It's not only that migraine affects 3 times more often women than men, but also if women have migraine, they are unproportionately affected. They have attacks that are longer, they are more severe, they are more difficult to treat, and their worst attacks often occur around the menstruation. What we know is that there's a tight relation between, for example, estrogen, an important female sex hormone, and the occurrence of migraine attacks around the menstruation. What we don't know is how this is exactly regulated. It's not stable levels, but rather a sudden decline, a disbalance in hormones that causes the migraine attack, or it helps the migraine attack to occur. And there are many hormones that all influence each other. And what we need to find out how this crosstalk is exactly regulated. In fact, it's a shame that we still cannot explain to women why they are getting their migraine attacks and what we can help do to prevent this. And I think there are several reasons. First of all, it's not low-hanging fruit. It's really scientifically complicated, but very intriguing to find out what is going on. And secondly, I think it has been a blind spot. And let's be honest, many researchers determining the research agenda, we are males. And I think they just didn't think so much of studying the menstrual cycle and what happens during this cycle.
Första gången jag sen träffade den här migränspecialisten Marie-Louise, det var liksom som en varm kram kan man säga. Hon förstod precis vad jag menade. Det var liksom som att jag behövde inte förklara för henne mer än precis påbörja en mening om hur jag kände. Så fyllde hon i resten av meningen för det var liksom, jag behövde inte bevisa någonting. Hon hade sån koll på detta. Därefter så blir jag då insatt på en profylaktisk behandling. Månaderna gick och jag började liksom registrera allt färre anfall i min migrändagbok som jag ändå fortsatte med. Och sen gick det upp för mig att jag har inte 4 anfall längre i veckan. Och där är inte ens 3, där är inte ens 2. Och sen ju längre tiden gick så kom de färre och färre. Och idag, och det har inte ens gått ett år sedan jag började, så kommer jag inte ens ihåg sist jag hade ett anfall. Det är ungefär 1-2 månader sedan. Jag har inte ens koll. Idag, med den här behandlingen, så är det ju verkligen så. Det låter kliché, men det är ju som att jag har fått livet tillbaka. Jag har kunnat leva på innan med hjälp av tabletterna, men så som jag lever nu så är det på ett annat sätt. Jag lever liksom på riktigt. Jag behöver inte vara frånvarande från min familj längre. Jag behöver inte fejka en fasad. Plus att jag känner att det känns mer okej att prata om det jag vill prata om. Det jag vill att folk ska förstå. Att de inte är ensamma. De ska inte känna sig så ensamma som jag kände mig.
Cluster headache is supposed to be the most painful condition a human being can experience, and it's sometimes referred to as suicide headache due to suicide attempts.
I remember it very well now. It was about 20 years ago. I was at home and suddenly I got an enormous headache, which was very unusual for me because I had never had any migraine or something like that. So I was rather shocked, and after 1 hour I was completely normal again.
Cluster headache, it's a primary headache disorder, just like migraine, but it has a much more severe pain, and there are shorter attacks between 15 minutes and 3 hours. We know that the age of debut is around 25 years of age, but the interesting thing is that the symptoms usually decline after 65. So it's a disorder during your working period of life.
And I phoned one of my doctor friends and asked, what is this? Is it a stroke or what could it be? And he was, which was very interesting, he understood a little about this, so he said, I guess it's Horton's headache, they call it, or cluster headache. And then I started a long period of time with different doctors, and no one found the solution.
We have to understand what causes cluster headache in order to treat it better. There are available treatments today, both acute and prophylactic, but they are all developed for other medical conditions. So they give a lot of severe side effects, and the treatment response is not 100%.
I have learned now, after many years from the experts, that on a scale from 1 to 10, this is on the number 9. So I can tell you I have had, like many people, headaches, or teeth ache and a lot of things, but this is not comparable to anything. That's why it's called sometimes suicide headache, because if I had that chronically and without possible treatment, I don't know what I would do really. So it's absolutely terrible.
My research team has established a unique biobank which consists of biological samples like blood and clinical data from cluster headache patients and controls It now consists of more than 1,000 individuals with cluster headache, and we use this biobank to screen for genetic markers that we believed are involved in cluster headache. We have identified several genetic regions linked to cluster headache, and the next step would be to investigate which genes are lying in these regions and how are they linked to cluster headache. We know that the circadian rhythm is linked to cluster headache. Around 2/3, a majority of all cluster headache patients report that they have their attacks at certain time points, usually at nighttime. Looking at cluster headache in a gender perspective, women have the more severe form of cluster headache more commonly than men.
I'm very impressed with what I have reached so far. The ultimate goal is of course to find some therapy for it, which works on all people. And to find the therapy, that means you have to understand what it depends on. Are there any, can you do anything with the genetic thing, or what is it? So it's a lot more to be done in this field.
Headache disorders have a huge impact on society and on an individual level. Despite this, it's underfunded.
And when I learned more about it, I realized that it's not high frequent, this terrible headache. It's not compared with many other things where governments and the pharmaceutical industries put money, because this is maybe 1 in 500, or some people say 1 in 1,000. So maybe it's too small niche for the pharmaceutical industries or governments to put a lot of money into it, and that is typically those kind of things we want to sponsor, where they have problem to get resources from other donors.
Headache disorders have a huge impact on the society and on an individual level. These disorders are the largest among the neurological disorders. Despite this, it's underfunded.
Headaches take a great toll, a tremendous toll on society when it comes to not just the disease itself, but the economic costs, the social costs that are coupled to this disease. So it is really urgent that we invest all the efforts and all the expertise we have to better understand this disease. And now at Karolinska Institute we have expertise, we have young talented scientists that seek to understand the reasons why some people develop this very, very serious headache. So I would say this donation and donations in general are essential for the development of this field.
There are two main challenges in continue to conduct research that will advance the field in the direction that allows to improve patient life. The first one is financial. Research is expensive, and it is getting more and more expensive every year, like everything else. And in order to make a difference, the world of headache and migraine, not only migraine, will have to continue to fight as hard as it can to come up with sufficient funding to conduct the needed research, number one. Number two, the field of headache is stuck for many years with a way too small number of scientists who are attracted to this field. It has many reasons. Some of them are related to the fact that many people in the world still don't believe that migraine is important to study. The concept that it may be a historical women's disease because it's mostly affecting women rather than a true neurological disorder still exists in significant part of the society. And in the pain community, there is a notion that migraine is one more pain and that it does not need any more attention than any other pain, which is a fair concept, although we have all the evidence that to convince them that they are wrong. And clearly, without bringing fresh brains and people with new knowledge and new technique and new thinking, we will get stuck in our small field, and new people will be a very welcome addition to the field of headache research. And by far, the largest challenge is to convince the generation that comes in to use their imagination and to be original and creative, and not to do research that agree with what other people already said. It is not how research is supposed to be.
Right now we are in the middle of the first international conference on advances in migraine sciences. And what inspired me for this conference is that when I entered first time the headache field, I remember that my mentor, Professor Antoinette, was organizing headache seminars. There were annual seminars every year, interesting topics focusing on headache science. And that was a huge inspiration for me as a young scientist. So this is just a reviving this idea to inspire all the young people around me that working, and not only around me, but also around the world, are becoming more and more interested in headache. So we need such meetings. And the faculty, it's 99% of the faculty are young scientists, young clinicians that are interested in headaches. So this is also a huge experience for them in organizing such a great event with now we have 2,500 people registered for this meeting, more than 120 countries registered for this meeting. So it's a fantastic experience for all these talents and what I would say the future prize winners. Whenever we're talking about the Brain Prize, we're talking about Nobel Prize, those are probably here, you know, those people. What I envision for the future is that when we start to understand more complex mechanisms of migraine, what I mentioned before about the intracellular mechanisms, we might achieve better understanding correlated with a better treatment. This is why it's important. And better treatment meaning a better control of migraine attack. Because the day that we can claim that we can cure migraine attack, it's impossible. It will be utopia. But we can control migraine attacks. We can improve quality of life. And you imagine that if we have different drugs and our armamentarium is quite wide, we can see some patients responding to one particular drug, another patient responding to another one. So we can expand this armamentarium, meaning that we can do a better job as a physicians for our migraine patients. And it is fantastic. So we're living now in the area that we can have a better control of migraine. But there is always room for improvement. That's why we need more research.